The brand new RTX 3060 is here, which can only mean one thing. It's time to build an awesome 3060 gaming PC build. In this video, I'm going to run you through the whole build process step by step, all the parts I chose and why, before booting this machine up and testing out the 3060 in loads of the most popular AAA titles. So without any further ado, let's dive into it. As ever, I'm going to kick things off by installing our CPU into the motherboard. This is the Ryzen 5 3600 Non-X, a really great value 6-core 12-thread chip that comes in way cheaper than the new 5600X, but still with the performance we're after. I'm going to be coupling it today with ASUS's B550M Plus tough gaming motherboard. This actually has Wi-Fi built in as well, which is super useful for the first time builder. It's got a really strong rear I/O with Wi-Fi, as we said, but also USB 3.1 Gen 2 for 10 gigabit speeds in both Type A and Type C, as well as a button for flashing your BIOS, so it covers everything that we need in a motherboard. The CPU is easily installed by lining up the triangle on the processor with the triangle on our motherboard's CPU socket, and then the chip simply drops very gently into place and the arm goes back down a little something like this. In terms of the CPU cooler, I've opted to stick with our stock cooler. The case choice today has plenty of airflow, and this is going to suck in enough air for some great temperatures and also a tiny bit of overclocking. To install the cooler, it's a simple case of finding each of the 4 black screws and lining these up with the corresponding 4 holes on our motherboard. If the cooler is brand new, you'll get pre-applied thermal paste on the bottom, but if you're reinstalling it or it's second hand, you'll need to drop a dab of your own on. Don't go too overboard, and then you can line the cooler up and screw it down. Finally then, we're just going to run our 4-pin CPU fan cable to the CPU fan header on the motherboard, a little something like this. The next component today is our RAM. I've got 16 gigabytes of Patriot Viper RGB, which is pretty good value and is going to look great in our build. This is a 32 gig kit, but we're only going to need half of it because 16 gigs is the ideal amount for a system like this, and with some nice diffused RGB and fast 3600 MHz speeds, it ticks all the boxes today. To install this, we're just going to pull back the grey clips on our 2nd and 4th RAM DIMM slots and line the notch on the memory with the corresponding notches on our grey RAM DIMM slots. It's then just going to slide into the RAM DIMM slots super duper easily and secure down. Make sure you apply even pressure to both sides, and just like that, the RAM is installed. That brings us nicely on to the final component to install into the motherboard before we go ahead and move this into our case. And that is our M.2 drive. I've got a 500 gigabyte Seagate Barracuda 510, though it's also available in 1 terabyte plus capacities, so you really can get as much storage as you need. On this motherboard, we've got a couple of options for our M.2 drive. We can either mount it here or under our heatsink down below. I'm going to go for under the heatsink, as it will help keep the M.2 temperatures nice and chilly. And don't worry, for this we will need a teeny tiny little screwdriver, famous here on the GeekaWhat channel, and rightly so. Once we've done this, we can remove our heatsink. We're then able to just go ahead and slide the M.2 drive in at kind of a 45-degree angle, make your life that little bit easier, and secure it down with the included teeny tiny screw, and then with our teeny tiny little screwdriver. Once you've done that, the M.2 heatsink then goes nicely back on, and our M.2 drive is successfully installed. Now then, with that, oh, whoopsie daisy, with that done, it's about time we move the motherboard assembly, as we're going to call it, into our case choice today. This is Antec's brand new DF700 Flux with loads of airflow, loads of fans, and most importantly, loads of RGB. I'm going to couple it with our power supply choice today, also from Antec. It's the Earthwatts Gold Pro. It's a really nice power supply. It is white aesthetically, but the cables are black, so don't worry about that. And while 700 watts is maybe a little bit overkill, especially 80 plus gold, it does give us future proofing and reliability, and mean that without breaking the bank, if you want to upgrade some components later, you most definitely haven't got to worry about it. Now, the case choice today is part of Antec's Flux range, which means you get not only some great kind of bang for your buck, but you also get some really great cooling performance out the box in what is otherwise a very kind of budget product. Okie dokie, I am liking the look of this thing a lot. That front panel is really cool. And at the front, you can actually see those kind of 3 RGB high airflow fans. There's also a fan in the rear and an extra fan included if you want some air for your GPU, which is a really cool addition actually. All we need to do is remove both of our case side panels. That is a properly thick piece of tempered glass. Even more ventilation, it's mad. And we're then able to remove this kind of Antec accessory box. In here, you're gonna find kind of all the screws and all the hardware you need to install the rest of the components into the case today, as well as the 5th included fan, which is a great addition. Now, to install the motherboard, we simply need to check that under each of the holes through our motherboard, line up with the corresponding standoffs pre-installed in our case today. Now, it's nearly correct. We just need to add one in here and add another one in here before we screw the motherboard into place. Don't forget to install the rear I/O shield as well. This is easily installed in the back of the case with the audio ports, that's the circular ones facing the bottom, and it goes in a little something like that. Easy peasy, and our motherboard just follows very closely and quickly behind. Now then, that brings us nicely onto our power supply, and running our cables today is going to be a little bit easier because we've actually used a micro ATX motherboard, which when the graphics card's in isn't going to feel too lost, but does make it easier for a first time builder and gives you a little bit of space to play around with. Now, this power supply is actually semi-modular, meaning it basically comes with all the cables you need pre-installed. Just to double check which cables you need, you want a 24-pin motherboard power connector that looks a little something like this. You want either 1 or 2 4+4 pin CPU power connectors to power up our processor at the top left of the motherboard. You want a dual 6+2 pin GPU power harness for our graphics card, although we'll only need 8 pins today. And then finally, you'll just need one of these, a SATA power harness. We won't need this for any drives or anything like that, but RGB controllers often use the SATA standard, so it doesn't hurt to have these on there. The power supply then very easily slides into the rear of the case. There we go, and secures down with the 4 screw hole locations. That will keep the power supply nice and secure and stop it from going anywhere. And with that in, we can go ahead and plug up some of our cables and wiring before finally we put the graphics card in, which I know we're all really excited about. In terms of the power cables though, we want a CPU power connector going to the top left of the motherboard, a 24-pin motherboard power connector, which goes to the right-hand side of our motherboard. We also then want to do our front panel cables, which includes our JFP1 for our power reset. These are kind of the fiddly little pinned connectors, and I'll pop a diagram on your screen now to make this easy to follow along with. We've also got USB 3, which is a large blue connector usually, and is a bit delicate. It is notched, so do be careful with this one. And then it's finally followed up with HD audio. This is for our headphone and mic jacks on the top of the case, and usually goes, as with this motherboard, to the bottom left-hand side. And on that note, it's finally time to install the graphics card, the last but arguably the most important component of today's build. This is ASUS's Republic of Gamers Strix card, which is kind of the range-topping card and has a slightly eye-watering recommended retail price. But as we've seen, RRPs for all the Ampere cards and even the AMD releases as well have kind of been a bit irrelevant, to be honest, at this point. This card, though, has really great rasterization performance, as you'll see in our gaming benchmarks in just a second, but also those second-gen RT cores for all the Ampere features people have come to know and love. Ray tracing performance is taken up a notch. DLSS 2.0 is supported, meaning you can use NVIDIA's fancy AI resolution scaling tech to get a higher visual fidelity, but also keep really high kind of low resolution frame rates. Let's take a look at this card though, and see just what ASUS have done with the new mainstream 1080p beast of a GPU. Okay then, look at that. That ROG Strix cooler is pretty gorgeous. The RGB is going to be awesome on here as well. And we've got a peel. Here we go. Oh yes, that is beautiful. And another one. I love a new GPU. It's beautiful. And another one! This is amazing! Really interestingly as well, you can actually see where the PCB on this card actually ends, so they've had to kind of extend it with this backplate add-on to make sure the cooler fits, but this should give us some great temperatures with this really large heatsink. And there is actually quite a lot of open area in this card as well, which perhaps indicates it's most definitely not going to run hot, but we will test that out. Remove the protective cover from the PCIe slot itself, and then kind of hover the card over the PCIe slot cover to find out which of the rear PCIe brackets we need to remove. In our case, it is slots 2 and slots 3 to make way for our graphics card to be installed. And with that, the GPU is installed. All we need to do is just secure it down with the included screw we took out a moment ago, and then give it power with a single 6+2 pin PCIe power connector. And once we've done that, we can boot our system up to see just how good it looks when it's all powered up, but more importantly, how it performs in a load of the most popular titles at 1080 and 1440p. But first, it's time for an epic glam montage of this absolutely gorgeous looking system. Roll the clip. Okie dokie, now we've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, let's take a dive and see exactly how it performs. I'm going to go into deeper detail into some of our titles in just a second, so hang tight, but on your screen now is a summary snapshot view of all the games we tested out, alongside some GPU temperature performance figures, and you can see already that the 3060 looks mightily impressive. Let's take a closer look though at some of these titles, kicking things off with GTA 5. Here at 1080p high settings, tested in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, we got 117, 106 and 93 FPS for the average 90 and 99th percentile result, meaning GTA 5 basically never dropped below 93 frames per second, which is kind of crazy. Watch Dogs Legions is next up today then, and we tested this at a variety of resolutions and settings. First up is 1080p very high with ray tracing and DLSS disabled, and here we got 97, 91 and 78 frames per second. But keep these high settings and turn DLSS on, Nvidia's AI-based resolution scaling technology, and your average frame rate jumps up to around 112 frames per second. I'm also happy to report that at 1440p high with ray tracing on, so really taking our settings up a notch today, we still managed to get 70 FPS on average with 66 and 62 for those 90 and 99th percentile results. Which goes to show the 3060 non-TI really is packing some punch. Next up today then is Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War tested in the game's inbuilt zombies mode. And here at 1080p high settings we got 101 FPS on average with 89 and 81 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. We did also test this at 1080p high with DLSS once again enabled and set to performance mode, and our FPS jumped up to 115, so definitely worth considering. Next up is Apex Legends, and here at 1080p high settings we got 135 FPS on average, with our frame rate set to unlimited in the Origin game launcher. Now this is around 20 FPS less than a 3060 Ti, which is more of a significant impact than we've seen in some of the other titles today, and does provide a really solid 20 FPS average increase over the 2060 from the previous generation. So forget about 1060, it's beaten out the 2060 by some quite hefty margins, and the game looked fantastic. Tune up to 1440p and your FPS goes down a little bit to 115, 102 and 93, but all in all still great frame rates really, considering the resolution and settings used. Next up is Valorant, and here at 1080p high settings we got 305 FPS on average, which is absolutely ridiculous. The CSGO inspired game with those much better graphics looked and performed, as you'd expect, pretty fantastically. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, and here at 1080p medium settings with no ray tracing and no DLSS, we managed to achieve 68, 62 and 58 FPS. Some really great numbers considering how difficult Cyberpunk is to run, and I'm glad to announce that if you turn DLSS on, you then jump up to 78, 68 and 60 for the average 90 and 99th percentile results, which is pretty impressive. But what if you want to take advantage of ray tracing? We'll turn ray tracing to medium at 1080p and you get 55, 46 and 41, and I think visually the game looked fantastic. Now ray tracing does have quite a hefty performance impact, but to get really close to that 60 FPS mark with RTX on in Cyberpunk really is not a bad effort. Lastly then today, the last game on our focus title list is Fortnite. I tested this at a range of settings from 1080p high right through to 1080p competitive settings, so hang tight. At 1080p high with no DLSS, we got 106 FPS on average with 99 and 91 for the 90 and 99th percentile result, so not a bad result. But what if you want to take that frame rate up a notch? We'll turn DLSS on, and here you get 131 FPS on average with 122 and 117 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. But what about competitive settings? Well, at 1080p competitive with everything tuned to low go on our render distance at far, you get 166 FPS on average, with 159 and 153 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. But James, what if you want to take it even further? Well, 1080p competitive settings with DLSS on performance, the game does look a bit Robloxy when you go this far with low visual fidelity and DLSS, but you do jump up to 213 frames per second. That is crazy, with 200 and 196 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. You'd think I'd remember that by now, would you not? And on that note, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the gaming benchmarks today, but for the whole video. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed. We'd love to see your face around it a little more often. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.